Hi, I'm Carl Herzog, public historian for the USS Constitution Museum. I was going to start this video this week about animals by introducing you to my puppy Gidget. But Gidget, it turns out, is too squirmy to have any interest in being on video, sitting patiently on my lap, so she's out of the picture. I'm kind of hoping she doesn't end up so squirmy that she doesn't enjoy life on boats or ships, but whether Gidget will turn out to be a sea dog or not is yet to be seen. She's only about 7 or 8 months old. We got her over the winter and she was born in the fall. We have had other dogs in the past that had a great time on boats and ships, and dogs in general, as well as cats and other pets, have always been a fixture on board ships and with crews sailing on long voyages on the open ocean. Dogs and cats make great rat catchers, but they also serve as wonderful pets for crew on long voyages. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of those aspects of having animals on board, not only as pets, but also in some of the other functions that they serve on board, which includes as livestock, something that's happened on USS Constitution as well, and also the presence of exotic animals on board. Several times, for a variety of reasons in its history, USS Constitution has ended up with some pretty exotic wildlife on its decks. Probably the most famous dog ever on USS Constitution, and the only one we know by name, was a small terrier named Garrier. That's right, Garrier the Terrier. Garrier was owned by Lieutenant Beekman Verplank Hoffman, who was on board during the War of 1812, and the public, as well as the crew, and even what we know about Garrier today, comes from the fact that the chaplain Ashton Humphreys, in his journal, recorded the antics of Garrier the Terrier on board and chronicled the dog's life and, unfortunately, the dog's sad demise in a way that really captured the attention not only of the crew and the public at the time, but captured for posterity the one dog on deck. Now, this doesn't mean that Garrier was the only dog on board. There were other dogs and cats and other animals on board serving as pets, and as we'll see. But Garrier was the only one that was known by name. Because of his fame, Garrier has become something of a mascot here at the USS Constitution Museum, and you can see images of Garrier in the museum when you are again able to visit it in person, scattered throughout and hidden throughout the museum. Since you can't come to the museum right now, we're still making it possible for you to hunt out and look for Garrier the Terrier. On the Explore Old Ironsides page of our new website, A Sailor's Life for Me, you can look for Garrier the Terrier in each of the scenes and locations around the ship. When you find Garrier the Terrier in any particular scene or location, there he is. Spoiler, I found him in the captain's cabin. You can click on him and it'll note that you found him somewhere around the ship. It's a fun game that you can continue to look for Garrier. By the way, as you look for Garrier in these images from around the Explore Constitution site of A Sailor's Life for Me, you'll also see other animals that appeared on board. In this image from Dinner Time at the Stove, which we showed a couple weeks ago as part of our food video, you can see a couple goats on the sidelines. Livestock was the second class of animals that were always on board the ship. After all, the best way to keep your food fresh for a long voyage, short of salting it, is to keep it alive. The downside to having livestock on board the ship, however, is that it does take up a lot of space, and livestock still need to be watered and fed in order to stay alive until you're ready to butcher them. This doesn't mean that livestock weren't on the ship, it just meant that they were in very limited supplies. Usually, as a result, livestock was preserved as a specialty for the officers, with the exception of where livestock was able to continue to produce something without being butchered in the case of milk or eggs. However, we do have evidence from other ships besides Constitution that there were, in particular, hogs kept on board to provide fresh pork for the crew over the course of a voyage. As you can imagine, however, a pig takes up even more space, and even if you had two of them for every mess on the ship, you begin to talk about having dozens upon dozens of pigs that have to live somewhere on board. Pretty messy animals on top of it all. People rarely think about the idea of having livestock on board or what it would mean in terms of where it would be kept, and you rarely see livestock or livestock pens displayed or portrayed in images of life at sea during the time period. However, in these clips from the movie Master and Commander, which was about a British Navy ship during the Napoleonic era, around the same time the Constitution was sailing in 1812, they did provide this hint at the fact that there was livestock both penned up on board, as well as having chickens in coops on the deck. By the way, if you'd never seen Master and Commander, this is an amazingly accurate portrayal of life on ships at the time period, and we're going to be hosting a movie club discussion of the film and giving everyone an opportunity to see it a little bit later on in a couple weeks. Surprisingly, the third big class of animals that appeared on board USS Constitution when it was actively sailing are exotic animals that were transported by the ship at various times in its history for a variety of reasons. One of the first and most notable examples of this was in 1814 when USS Constitution stopped the British merchant ship Susanna, which was traveling from Buenos Aires back to Europe. And among the other things that Susanna had in its cargo were 2 tiger cubs. They were listed as tiger cubs, but we're pretty sure in retrospect that they were actually jaguars, and Captain Charles Stewart brought them on board Constitution, initially chaining them up in one of the boats on deck. But then, once Susanna was secured and the threat of another possible warship had been cleared away, he placed a prize crew on Susanna and sent it back to the States along with the Jaguars, which ended up on public display when they got back to the U.S. The next big experience of exotic animals on board USS Constitution came under this guy, Captain Jesse Duncan Elliott. Elliott is regarded as probably one of the worst, if not the worst, captain that Constitution ever had. Elliott took over the ship in 1833 and in 1835 commanded the ship to the Mediterranean as part of the Mediterranean Squadron. There, as head of the squadron, Commodore Duncan Elliott abandoned the ship regularly, leaving it in the hands of a lieutenant while he abused his authority and position to go on a variety of sightseeing and shopping trips across the European continent. As you might imagine, Elliott wasn't the best people manager either, and the crew suffered from a variety of conflicts during the time when he was in command in the Mediterranean. At any rate, at the end of all this in 1838, as the ship was finally getting ready to leave the Mediterranean and return to the United States, Elliott made one last stop to load up the ship with a variety of exotic animals that he wanted to bring back with him. It was a pretty insane list, and it burdened the ship and the crew dramatically over the time period of their voyage back across the Atlantic. His list included 6 donkeys, an Arabian bay horse, 5 Arabian mares, 3 Arabian colts, an Andalusian colt, 3 Andalusian hogs, and 2 Syrian hogs. Initially, he tried to stow all these on the upper deck, but it was clearly no place that they were going to survive a long sea voyage, so all these animals ended up getting moved down to the gun deck, where they occupied so much space that they displaced 7 of the long guns that were there, making them inoperable during the time period that the ship was crossing the Atlantic, and a total of 8 separate crew were dedicated just to the care and feeding of the animals. In fact, after leaving the Mediterranean, the ship had to stop for a week in Madeira just to refresh the animals, and when he arrived back in the States, he made an unauthorized stop at a separate village to offload all these animals before taking Constitution to the main port, where the crew should have been able to end their contracts, thus delaying their departure from the ship as well. As a result of all this, Elliott ended up being court-martialed and found guilty on a number of charges, but thanks to political connections, was able to get his sentences removed and penalties removed and continued to serve in the Navy, later becoming a commandant at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. Stories that continued to circulate among the crew who were on board for this voyage referred to the ship during the time period as Elliott's Ark. And lastly, we have records of a couple different exotic animals that were on board USS Constitution during its national cruise of American ports in the early 1930s. This was right after USS Constitution had undergone a massive restoration in the late 1920s, and to thank the Americans who had donated their pennies to contribute to that restoration, the ship went on a tour of ports that began in New England and Boston, went all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, through the Panama Canal, and up the West Coast. Among the scrapbooks that were kept by the crew on board was one by young Frank Pruce of Worcester, Massachusetts, who took this picture that he posted in his scrapbook of a spider monkey, Rosie, who was one of the pets on board. Here's another image of Rosie from one of Frank Purse's scrapbook photos, showing the monkey playing on the bell on board USS Constitution's deck. Frank also took pictures of a bear cub named Scrappy, who appeared in, who was on board both USS Constitution and seen here on board USS Grebe, the towboat that accompanied and towed USS Constitution from port to port for that tour. By the way, the USS Constitution Museum has in its collection 5 separate scrapbooks from kept by crew members who were on board during the national cruise, and these are actually all available for download as PDFs from the National Cruise category page of the Explore Collection section of the museum's website. You can see all of these in full pages and download the PDFs yourself, or browse them or take a look at them online. They're a pretty exciting look into the adventures that these young men must have had while they were on board the ship being visited by millions of people as it traveled the coast of the country. Because of its timing right before World War II, a number of the crew members who were on board Constitution for the national cruise ended up serving in the U.S. Navy in the Pacific Theater during World War II just a few years later. And with the help of some alluring treats, I'm able to show off my sea dog, future sea dog, and current puppy Gidget for the close of this video. Show us your dog and sea dog and puppies too, and upload it to our social media with the hashtag USSCMCDog. And let us know if you have any questions or comments about this video. Feel free to post to any of our social media outlets. As always, and if you have thoughts or questions on things other than this or other topics you'd like to see us cover in future videos, don't hesitate to post that as well, too. Say goodnight, Gidget. Nope, you don't even want the last one. Bye. You don't like them, huh? There you go.